This theater was founded by Sir Tyrone Guthrie in 1962, and ever since it's been an integral part of our culture and our community.
The Guthrie is about to unveil a new season and usher in a new era with their new artistic director, Joe Dowling.
And you'll get to meet Mr. Dowling and learn about his plans for the Guthrie Theater on Artifacts next. Well, we've made the mad dash back to the studio from the Guthrie, and I'm anxiously awaiting my discussion with Joe Dowling, who is our first guest on this edition of Artifacts.
And of course, we have a fine lineup of guests after that, starting with John Habich, who's the team leader of fine arts coverage at the Star Tribune, followed by pitching practice.
Yes, Janet's bringing on some guests who will show you the ins and outs of pitching a screenplay to Hollywood production executives and agents.
And then Phill will be back with Jane Frees-Kluth, a local sculptor who's participating in the Stone Arch Festival of the Arts in Minneapolis on June 15th and 16th.
So stay tuned. Joe Dowling will be with me right after this. Well, I must say, the upcoming season at the Guthrie Theater looks very exciting to me, and as a fan of the Guthrie, I'm very pleased to have with us on Artifacts its new artistic director, Mr. Joe Dowling.
Hi.
Welcome to the show, and by the way, welcome to Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Thank you very much.
And I do apologize for this winter we've just been through. That was quite a brutal one. So.
Apologies are needed after this winter.
But you are on board. How long have you been here now? You came, what, the last year?
I came in October, but I was started officially as artistic director on the 1st of December, so I had a bit of time of overlap, and then I took over.
Great. New season, new ideas, new themes. Can you talk a little bit about what you're intending for this season to be full of?
Well, it's a season full of what I hope are great plays, essentially. I think one of the things that's so wonderful about the Guthrie space, that unique thrust stage, I think it's a very exciting space when it's filled with really great acting and great plays and great literature and a great sense of theatre. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really anxious that this season will be about. So I've chosen plays by what I regard as some of the great writers of the world, Ibsen and Chekhov and Shakespeare and Arthur Miller and Brian Freell and Oliver Goldsmith. And I've chosen plays that personally mean a lot to me, because it's very hard when you come to a community like this, and I know the Guthrie's been around for a very long time and it's been tremendously supported by its community, so it would be kind of impertinent for me to arrive along and say, well, I know what the audience here want to see. So essentially the first season has to be about plays that I feel are important and are important to me for different reasons. So it's a play, as I say, a season of plays about greatness, about the real great writing for the theatre, and hopefully also great performances from actors.
Yes, I've been hearing excitement about that, and I was a little surprised to learn that at least a couple of these plays had never been done at the Guthrie.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, in the summer rep, for instance, we're going to do Brian Freell's play, Philadelphia, Here I Come, which will open in early August. And that play has never been done at the Guthrie, but it has a history at the Guthrie, because when Brian Freell, who's Ireland's premier playwright, he came here in 1963 at the invitation of Guthrie and actually saw theatre really first-hand and for the first time up close at the Guthrie Theatre here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and went back to Ireland and wrote Philadelphia, Here I Come. And I had a letter from him recently in which he said, you know, how pleased he was we were doing it this summer, and that in many ways he felt the play was coming home. And yes. I was very touched by that, because it felt to me right that a play that's never been done there, but which had its origins at the theatre and in this community, is coming back to...
Yes, completing the circle.
Completing a circle, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a nice tie-in for folks who've been growing up and going to the Guthrie and learning about this thing.
Well, yes, I mean, because a lot of people wouldn't have known, they've heard of Brian Freell through Dancing at Lunasa and through other plays, but they wouldn't have known that he actually started his theatrical career here in that first season that Guthrie did.
And what a great opportunity that was given to him, and now we have the opportunity to see where he's gone on to. And all
absolutely.
That. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Joe Dowling. What is your background? For those who don't know, you come from Dublin most recently.
Yes, I'm Irish. I come from Dublin. I started at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. I was an actor for many years there. Went on to direct. I'm not quite sure how I got into directing, quite honestly. I was very happy to be an actor, but I have a very bossy personality, and I think that sort of led me almost naturally into telling other people how to do it instead of doing it myself. And so people said, oh, so you want to tell us how to do it? Well, then become a director. So I did. But well, that's a sort of flippant way of saying that I changed midstream from.
Yeah, you have a sense of what you want to see out there, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, and no shortage of opinions. So anyway, I became a director, and then very shortly after that, I was asked to run a small theatre, which is called the Peacock Theatre, which is beside the Abbey. In fact, it's kind of under the Abbey. It's part of the same complex. And a few years later, I became the youngest ever artistic director of the Abbey, which is Ireland's national theatre. Yes. So that was an extraordinary sense of foreboding and quite extraordinary. I was 27 years of age.
Well, that is remarkable.
To take over a national theatre, yes.
And in a land that is known for its writers and its playwrights.
Yes.
And its storytellers.
Yes, and also, I mean, as Brendan Behan would say, known for its begrudgers. Because I mean, people in Ireland, there is a tremendous interest in the arts, but there's also, it's part of everyday conversation. People do talk about it in a way that makes, when you're artistic director of the Abbey, you're in the front line, you're in the firing line.
The stakes are high.
Oh, very high.
Yes, I heard, tell me if this is true, or if you've heard of this. I understand that poets in Ireland get a tax break for doing their poetry.
Creative artists.
Is that right?
Whether they be poets or playwrights or novelists or creative artists, not actors and not directors, I'm afraid, but writers of any sort, or sculptors or painters, do. It's a terrifically enlightened policy that was put into effect some years ago by the government in Ireland that would attract writers to Ireland, but also make sure that, we have a history in Ireland of emigration. It's a history of people like James Joyce, who said, he had to fly the nets of Ireland to get away. And we have a history of losing our great writers and our great artists to other countries. And one of the, I think, more enlightened policies that our government put into effect some years ago was that writers and artists generally would have the opportunity to live in their own country, be part of that community, and they needed a tax break because clearly, writers don't always make large sums of money.
Well, that's right. Quite an investment in its cultural community.
An investment in the future was
that's
what it
right.
was,
Very
and,
well
and it
done.
has worked.
Very well
it's
done.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of competition, certainly hereabouts, and I think nationally, for the entertainment dollar. And I heard you recently remind an audience of Minneapolitans that when Tyrone Guthrie got this theater going, and I forget the exact quote, and I'm hoping you do, that he said, "We are not here to educate, but to," I forget.
He said, "We're not here to uplift or instruct, but to entertain and delight." But he then added what I think is the most important rider. He said, "But I don't know of any great play, well done, that won't uplift and instruct as well as entertain and delight." But that shouldn't be the primary purpose of its interpreters any more than it was of those who wrote the play in the first place.
But yes.
And I think that, we sometimes in theatre, and theatre can at its best be the most exciting interaction between actor and audience, at its best. When it doesn't work, it's deadly. And it's terrible. So it really has to be about that interaction. It has to be about, and what excites me about the space at the Guthrie, and what excites me about the Guthrie itself, is that the audience and the actor are close together. There's no distance between one and the other. So that interaction is what makes theatre great. But we do tend in theatre sometimes to forget the word entertainment, or to treat it as a dirty word. To be entertaining is somehow not to fulfill our function as great artists. Well, primarily, theatre is about entertainment.
Absolutely.
It's about other things as well, and it's about helping us to understand who we are as human beings. It's about helping us to understand the shared humanity that we have with other cultures, with other generations, with other ages. But essentially, we don't go to the theatre because we want to have sort of some kind of instruction. We go because we think the play will entertain us.
Yes.
And it'll entertain us in different ways. I mean, entertainment doesn't mean mindless entertainment. It can be entertainment for the intellect as well as for the soul. But if the soul is not treated well, I think the intellect gets very bored very quickly.
Well, good for you. The fullness of the mission is what I'm hearing coming from you. That's very inspiring. That's good. With that in mind, any significant changes? Obviously, the Christmas Carol will be back, but I think I heard you say that there are going to be some
We're going to do a new
changes
production this year, yes.
New
We're going to do a
production.
new production of it this year.
Okay.
But we're certainly having a look at it. It's a terrific thing, Christmas Carol. I'm inspired by this and quite humbled by it. I mean, nowhere certainly in Ireland, and I don't think in Britain, is there a show which comes back year after year and attracts the same loyalty year after year.
Right.
So we must be absolutely honest to the audience who've come year after year, and to present the Christmas Carol again is an important thing. And those who come to Christmas Carol, some of them don't ever come to anything else in the year. We'd love them to. We'd love them to come to everything because we think they'd enjoy it just as much as they would Christmas Carol. But the fact that they come in to our theatre for that period and bring children, that's important to us.
Oh,
Very
yes.
important.
One of the things I think you were known for before you came here, and I've seen this in some literature about you, and that is what we would call arts education, or the education of the young in terms of art and culture. Do you want to talk a little bit about your interest in that?
I started my career as an actor first of all, and then I began to get interested in education in the arts very early, and I started a company in Dublin which we called the Young Abbey, because we were a group of actors within the theatre who felt that it was our function to go on some sort of outreach and reach out to the educational community. And at that time, theatre in education was a very established form in Britain particularly, and we started a theatre and education company in Dublin which was about going out to schools, going out to the community. And it was a very successful thing, and then we changed it into a different company which still runs and still exists in Dublin. But it's an area that interests me greatly, and one of the reasons why the Guthrie job appealed to me was because education is very much at the heart of its mission. I think I'm not so concerned that we develop audiences for the future. I think people must make choices whether they want to go to the performing arts or not. Dragooning people into it is not the way to encourage them to love it. But at the same time, there are values that the theatre and drama particularly can offer to young people in terms of understanding who they are as human beings, and helping them to express those things and to express their creativity and their imagination in ways that they won't perhaps reach in other areas of their studies. So I'm very interested in young people, and I'm very interested also in training for the arts. I started a drama school in Dublin, and I believe that we must train because the classic theatre that we're engaged in, putting on Shakespeare and Ibsen and Chekhov and all these plays, they demand things from actors that television doesn't demand, or that film doesn't demand. They demand a kind of a knowledge of language and an understanding of language. And we must be there to train young actors so that they have for the future generations of audiences, have the opportunity to engage these great plays of the past.
Great. Very impressive. I'm glad to hear that. In that context, and I think I know the answer you're going to give, or I intuit it, what is the role of the arts theater in particular with some of the great social stresses that we're going through today?
Well, I don't believe in theatre as polemic. I don't believe we should use theatre to sort of preach political viewpoints. Political debate is dramatic enough without necessarily it getting involved in theatre. I think theatre does a much deeper thing about society, though. I think it helps us to understand ourselves communally. As a community, the theatre helps. There's a nature to theatre that's about coming together and learning. There's a quote that I use very often from a Canadian director called John Hirsch, and he said, and he was a man who had actually escaped from the Holocaust and therefore knew something about what he was talking about when he said, in life we have to learn how to be human, and we have to relearn it and relearn it. And one of the places where you can learn how to be human is in the theatre. And I'm very inspired by that particular quote, because it seems to me that yes, we want to entertain, yes, we want to engage, yes, we want people to feel warm and feel good, but we also want them to come out thinking that they know a little bit more about themselves and about the people around them. Whether the play was written in the 15th century or the 20th century, it tells us something about that shared humanity and that common capacity to be human that I think is one of the truly important things about the performing arts generally, but I think obviously specifically about theatre, which is my medium.
And that will be a job well done. Quick last question, we're just about out of time. Other than the theatre, what's a nice night out for Joe Dowling? What do you like to go out and do and enjoy?
Go to the theatre. One track mind. I've recently taken up golf, and probably the worst golfer in Minnesota, or so my golf teacher tells me. And so, I mean, if this weather lasts, I may get the occasional shot at the old ball.
Well, you have a couple of weeks anyhow.
A couple of weeks, yes, before the winter sets in again.
Joe Dowling, thank you very much for being on the show.
You're very welcome.
Pleasure to have you here. Well, now, John Habich of the Star and Tribune is up next, but first we'll take another look at an arresting Artifacts art quote. We'll be right back. So it looks like there are always going to be workers in the arts. Well, speaking of workers in the arts, my next guest is John Habich. He's the fine arts team leader over at the Star Tribune, which is the newspaper of the Twin Cities. John, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Glad you made it. Let's start with some basics. Star Tribune is, I would guess, the largest, the most preeminent newspaper in the metropolitan Twin Cities, probably in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yes, it is.
And you are responsible for the fine arts coverage. Can we just define what we mean by fine arts to begin with?
The area that I supervise deals with classical music, theater, dance, architecture, visual arts, and theater.
Okay, so that would include, say, Linda Mack then in the architecture as well as the performing
Yes, in terms
arts.
of her architecture criticism, yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. And you have a colleague who does what's called popular culture.
Popular culture. We work together sort of as a symbiotic pair of editors.
Right.
We're called team leaders. Our groups of people are called teams. We function in many ways as traditional editors do, and in some unusual new ways.
Well, and this is part of a whole new configuration at the Star Tribune. I think what most of our viewers would recognize certainly is the page layouts. I mean, the actual composition of the paper started changing, incrementally a couple years ago.
They did a couple of years ago, and then we rolled out section by section a new design last year.
Yeah, and you've tweaked that a little bit, a little changes
Well, yeah,
here.
we're making changes
Yeah.
in it now.
But then I was surprised when I came over to your newsroom some weeks back that you also physically restructured the layout, the physical layout of,
We
of
did.
the newsroom.
At the same time, we redesigned the newspaper. We remodeled our offices. We reconfigured our computer system, and we restructured the organization.
I didn't know about the computer
So
system.
it was a major stress time.
Yeah, I imagine it was. And meanwhile, you got a few papers out there.
Meanwhile, tomorrow's paper has to come out.
Well,
yeah.
how's the staff relating to that? And I mean, critically or otherwise? I mean, that's going to be a time of transition, obviously.
Certainly, we've had a time of big transition over at the Star Tribune, and I think we're just coming out of that now, to where people are getting used to the reconfigured territory in so many senses, and sort of rediscovering what we do and how we do it, looking at that in some new ways.
So on this side of all that, change is probably for the better. I mean, fresher ideas, new way of going about things.
In a lot of ways, it is, yeah. Okay. In this new team approach, we're organized basically by subject. We're not organized by sections of the paper anymore. So somebody no longer calls me to say, I really think that my story deserves to be on page 1 of your section. I'm simply dealing with fine arts coverage all over the newspaper, and then there's another set of people, coordinators, who decide where a story runs.
Okay.
Based on whether it's more of a business story, is this about the business of the arts? Does this deal more with the community life, in which case it might be a metro story, like the story that we had last week on the art festival, Art of Whirl in the Northeast.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's as much a community life story as it is a story about the arts.
That's right.
Equal parts, one,
Sure.
one and the
And I
other.
suppose it could be pitched also a business thing, because you got a lot of people making a living there, and somebody's got to make.
Sure. We would have probably reported the story a little bit differently to run it as a business story.
Right. Now that's an interesting example that you bring up, because you gave that some good coverage. I mean, there was a map,
Right.
diagrams, listings, and things like that.
Right.
How do those decisions get made? It sounds to me like it's more than one person.
It is.
Arbitrarily deciding that.
It
It's
is.
a team approach.
It's a team approach, but in this case, it's myself going into a group meeting of editors, talking about what's coming up, and discussing where this story would best fit in the newspaper. How important is it? It was our judgment in that case that it was really important to the life of a very important neighborhood in Minneapolis, and it had a lot of interest far outside of interest among arts people, interest among people who are going to go. It also had a lot to do with community development and changing trends in population, with artists moving from the warehouse district basically to the northeast Minneapolis.
And I think you just said something very key, and I wanted to explore this. And I don't mean this is not a leading question, but the way you describe that, you're basing your coverage and making your journalistic choices dependent on what you think your readers want to know or should know or need to know, versus, and here's where the question comes in, versus what the industry or the field thinks you ought to cover. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we not only decide what we think people ought to know, we also talk about what we think they would be interested in knowing, what might have some value to them, what might be unusual for them to read about. And so, yeah, we definitely take an outsider's approach, and there are many times when the newspaper is on opposite sides of the track from the business community, the arts community, the political community, you name it.
Because they see you as a primary vehicle to get their message out.
Right.
And that's not the role.
Well, and there's no doubt that is true, that whatever message it is that we're conveying it to an awful lot of people.
Well, that's right.
But that's not our prime reason is not to share whatever particular news somebody thinks needs to get out. That in fact may be the case, that we think that news is very important.
There may be a congruence there.
There may be a congruence there,
that's not
yes,
what
but
drives
not
your decision.
necessarily so.
Well,
Right.
maybe later we can chat briefly about this notion of civic journalism, but to get very specific about the Twin Cities, and you certainly do cover the Twin Cities, it's my impression, not from a journalistic point of view, but as a citizen, that there's, to some extent, a difference between the two inner cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and this tremendous ring of suburbs in which a million people live or whatever. How difficult is it to keep both audiences in mind? I mean, the Star Tribune certainly is rooted here in the city limits of Minneapolis. I mean, you print it here, you do the work here, and yet you have a tremendous audience that's out past Highway 100, over in
Right.
Washington County. How do you balance the awareness of folks that are out in Eden Prairie with the occurrences that are going on here, City Hall, Minneapolis, or something like that?
We really look at ourselves as primarily a metro newspaper, and after that also a statewide newspaper, but primarily we're a metro area newspaper. We don't think of ourselves as the Minneapolis paper, which a lot of people still say, oh, the Minneapolis paper,
Right.
versus the St. Paul paper. But a number of years ago, when we dropped Minneapolis from our name, that was a very considered decision about basically taking a metro stance.
Good point.
And so what's different from us, I think, is that between us and the St. Paul paper is that they're much more strongly St. Paul than they are necessarily a metro newspaper. We try to be strongly a metro newspaper. So we cover, for instance, we cover downtown St. Paul outfits like the Ordway Music Theater or the Science Museum or the Children's Museum or the Minnesota History Center. We cover major events there, and we know full well that they have a lot of audience from the western suburbs of Minneapolis.
That's right.
Likewise, we cover major Minneapolis events because we know that they have metro-wide
draw, sure.
draw, yeah.
Is it your sense, I have a strong impression that there's a trend that the arts are burgeoning in the second and third ring suburbs as well. New facilities
I
being
think
built, companies
there's
growing.
there's a lot of activity in the second and third ring suburbs in general. I mean, a lot of they're getting old enough that they're beginning to go through some interesting cycles there, and some things that several years ago would have been thought of only as as urban situations using the arts as a development tool. That's certainly happening in some of the suburbs right now.
Let's talk a little bit about background. Here you are, an otherwise sane young man. You're the fine arts team leader for a major metropolitan paper. What got you into this? I mean, you woke up one day and said, that's what I want to do? Huh?
I was in architecture school and realized at about age 21, after 3 years of architecture school, that I didn't want to be an architect. I went into journalism as a stopgap measure, and it took. I have a pretty broad background in various fine arts. I did studio art at Cardinal Stritch College in Milwaukee, and piano, classical piano at the Wisconsin College Conservatory. So I have a smattering of background. I've done some acting and playwriting and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, I decided when I was working for a small newspaper and wrote my first review that it was a lot more fun than the Sewer and Water Commission hearings. So
Good for you. So now if we get some public art there out in the sewer public works area, maybe you can cover that or something.
maybe so, maybe so.
Let's talk a little bit about the Star Tribune's approach to the arts. My impression is that you cover a lot of beats within the fine arts. I mean, leaving aside the pop culture.
We cover a lot of beats. I think that one thing that impresses me a lot about the Star Tribune, one reason why I enjoy working here is that, but this is probably true of the Twin Cities in general, is that the arts are news here. The arts are definitely perceived as a community resource. They're a big part of people's identification with the community, and the newsmakers at my newspaper are cognizant of that and treat it as such. So it's not unusual at all for us to have a front page arts story.
I've been noticing that this spring in particular, and I don't know if that's a trend that you consciously did, but I've been seeing a lot more arts stories, hard news on the front page.
Hard news on the front page,
Yeah.
yeah. Whether it's a major acquisition by one of the museums or a trend piece. We did our first big interview with Joe Dowling from the Guthrie Theater on page 1A.
That's right.
And I mean, it just goes to show that people agree that the arts are important here.
Right. Not so much the Star Tribune's take on this, but within the arts community, the arts industry here, any significant holes or gaps that you've seen from your point of view? Anything that we're missing?
Tell me some more.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of, is there a part of the arts ecology that the Twin Cities needs, like a good dance space, more arts education, or anything like this? I mean, from your point of view as a journalist covering what's there, are you seeing any gaps or holes as to something that's not out there that this community maybe could benefit by having?
No, I think I think that there are constantly shifting balances in terms of how important one thing is to another. But if you would have talked to anybody here in the mid-'60s, they would have said, "Boy, this is a theater town."
Yeah.
Early '70s, because there was so much new activity in
that was kind of driving the theater.
And people were neglecting to realize perhaps that it was just as much a classical music town with 2 major orchestras here, some world famous choruses here, a lot of chamber music and so on. Then certainly in the '80s we became a pop music town as well. Right. And had at one point in the mid-'80s, I remember us doing a story about 35 local artists having national recording contracts and studios being built here and so on and so forth. There was a lot of activity in the '80s in the visual arts, and while that's gone through some economic ups and downs, certainly we have innumerable galleries here and several major museums.
So pretty healthy.
So part of my job, part of the problem of my job is trying to figure out how to fit most of that stuff into the paper.
Yeah.
Because we devote a lot of space to it.
Right.
But for example, when I go to another town, the size of Minneapolis, St. Paul, I might see a little story in the paper that says chamber music ensemble to play Thursday at historic
so 4
home.
or 5 inches maybe.
You know, and this is, you know, at least worth a little story.
Yeah.
We have to try to cram all that stuff into the calendar just to get it in listings because there's so much stuff going on here people spend a lot of money on.
I'm glad you mentioned
Arts.
calendars. We've got just a moment left. Any changes? I think I'd heard you talk about, you're always taking a look at what you're doing with calendars. Book section, anything?
We're looking at what we're doing in all of those areas right now. As this new team approach has come up and is running, we're all plugging into it and deciding whether we're going to do something a different way.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
John, thanks for
Keep
being
on the paper.
Okay, we will. Now, Janet will be right back to talk about screenplay pitching. That's Hollywood style with Hafed Bouassida and Kevin McKeever right after this factoid. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Janet Zahn with the Office of Film, Video, and Recording for the City of Minneapolis. And with me today are 2 good souls. We have Hafed Bouassida and Kevin McKeever. Hafed is a teacher at Minneapolis Community College Film and Video program. And Kevin is one of his students. And you're a screenwriter?
Yes.
Correct?
Aspiring.
Well, and we're here today to talk a little bit about Hollywood Pitch Day, which happens every year, first weekend in June. This is the 7th year that the Independent Feature Project North has sponsored this event where they bring in agents and production executives, real decision makers from Hollywood to listen to ideas, correct?
Correct.
And you, Hafed, have been helping some people with their pitches, including Kevin.
Yes, certainly. That's one part of the class. We are having screenwriting classes at Minneapolis Community College where we have advanced classes and some of those students generally, one part of the class is to prepare them for that pitch and to have them actually pitch. So this is first time when we have about 6 students who are going to pitch in that pitch day.
And we've talked a little bit, I admire people who are willing to take their ideas and do this pitch. It can be easy.
It's hard.
But, yeah, it's hard. But today we're going to make it easy for you, Kevin. I'd like to try. I know you're going to prepare, you have prepared a pitch that you're going to be doing on pitch day. And I thought it would be interesting for people to find out what this is all about and to hear just a little bit of your pitch. Are you ready to go?
Sure. This is just the opening.
So go ahead.
Okay. Southern California desert. Miles of rock and sand. 2 businessmen look out at the land. The first, he just sees barren, lifeless desert. But the second man is trying hard to convince him there's so much more than meets the eye. This is Mitchell Ellison. He's a cold man, selfish. He's always made his living off of shady business deals. But 1 year ago, Mitchell comes up with a new idea. He buys a 1-year option on this area of land this desert land. For that 1 year, he brings out hundreds of potential investors, desperately trying to get them to invest in his vision of creating a city out of barren desert. Not a tourist or a gambling place like Las Vegas, but something good, for once, to create life from a desert. He names his land El Cielo, which is Spanish for heaven. He's forced to borrow money from a loan shark to support his efforts. But apparently it's no good, because near the end of the year, that loan shark comes for his money, and Mitchell doesn't have it. The loan shark breaks both of Mitchell's thumbs. They heal. But a week later, Mitchell's hands are tied behind his back, his feet are anchored to a chunk of concrete, and he is thrown into the Pacific Ocean and drowned. 2 weeks after that, the undercurrent pulls his body free from the ropes and washes his corpse ashore. This is where our movie, El Cielo, starts.
Oh, I'm intrigued. I think you did it.
That's the opening.
I was most intrigued by the fact that this guy has drowned, and his body has come back.
Yeah, you actually never see him in the movie.
Yeah.
He is the victim.
Very good job.
That's probably one of the ways how to start a pitch, where you have to try in a pitch to find the essence of a movie. You have to try to intrigue me right from the beginning. You have 2 minutes in the beginning to attract my attention, to grab my attention. And usually it makes a lot of sense to start with something that is powerful, visually powerful, that is going to attract you into the mood of the film.
Into the picture,
into the picture, into the mood, the atmosphere of the film. One of the goals of a pitch is to try to make me feel what later on in the movie I am supposed to feel. And that's hard. So a lot of pitches, a lot of successful pitches basically start with this kind of powerful scenes where your attention is grabbed, and now you want to know more. You want to know, so what happened? Okay, and there I get you there. So it is, that first scene is known as a teaser, some kind of teaser that attracts me, and then you can tell me, even just the substance of the story, the main ideas of the story. You know, pitching it's not about telling me a story. First of all, you don't have time to tell me the story. I mean, you have 5-10 minutes. That's all I give you. You cannot tell a story in detail in 5-10 minutes. What you are supposed to do is, like, for instance, when you take it's the comparison of an ad, like an advertising. You have 30 seconds to tell me the substance of that product. I mean, they can tell you. They're not going to tell you what's in a Pepsi or what's in a Coca or what's in this or what's in that. They have to choose what is the essence of that product. And they have to pitch you about it, and they have 30 seconds to do that. Am I going to buy or not? Same thing. Am I going to like this atmosphere, this mood, this beginning of a story, the expectation of a story? That's what a pitch is all about. Okay.
Tell me, now I noticed one of the things that you did immediately when you started, your posture changed a little bit. You came a little bit closer to me. There are physical things that you're learning to do too that that's obviously important. I mean, I felt certainly a little more commitment from coming forward to me, and the eye contact was really, really good. But that's stuff that you have to do as well when you're pitching.
Sure. That's one of the first things he teaches you, even to square off, to face them. Just, Hafed, he'll really get in your face. So,
Yeah, it's a big part of the whole thing. I mean, how am I supposed to attract your attention if there is not a sort of eye contact first? My body language is important. And the whole thing, I mean, in a pitch, there are probably 3 basic rules that really, really stand for something. First, time. Second, simplicity. And third is your commitment, your excitement. Time. Executives do not have time for long pitches. In fact, you pitch them because they don't have time.
They don't have time to read.
They are willing to give you 5 minutes to listen to your story. If it is worth something, they will read something, But if it is not worth something, why would they lose their time? That's why time is an issue, okay? Yes, go ahead.
So my question to both of you is, so you have 5 minutes, you got a great idea. Your pitch your pitch has to be as good or better than your idea, because this is it. This is your chance.
Absolutely.
True?
Absolutely.
How do they, I'm saying, how do they evaluate? How can they, if you kind of screw up your pitch, even if you have a great idea, will they see that?
Well, the fact is, as a producer, I'm going to see, first of all, if there are those ingredients that are going to make a good movie or not, are they there? If that mood or that atmosphere I'm looking for is there.
Right.
If there is something original about it, just like when he was talking about this first scene, and suddenly he surprised you by the guy being drowned.
Yeah.
Yes, that's an excitement. That's a surprise. I didn't expect that. In a pitch, I am supposed, or I am expecting to see 2 or 3 powerful moments of the film. Those are going to make the film.
Okay.
So do I find that in a pitch, okay? And certainly the third thing I need to know is how excited that person is about the story itself. Is he capable to transmit that excitement to you? I mean, because generally when you pitch, you don't pitch right away to the person who is the decision maker.
Right.
So sometimes you pitch to less level people and so on. And those are going in their turn to pitch it to their boss, who is going to make the final. So, I mean, if they are not excited about it, how are they going to present your story? Okay? So excitement, is one of the most important parts in a pitch. In general, this kind of rumbling, monotonous kind of pitch is never going to fly. Because if it says something, it says that you are not really excited about your own story.
Sure.
And if you are not excited about it, why would I have to
Absolutely.
be excited about your story if you are not? That's the main idea.
Kevin, tell me about, as you were writing your screenplay, and is this something that just bubbled up and you sat down and you wrote it, and now tell me about the excitement level of doing this. This is your first screenplay? Doing the screenplay first, and what you're bringing to your pitch from, what you've experienced in writing it.
The screenplay was hell.
Was it really?
Oh God, yeah. Writing it, it was a nightmare.
And why is that?
It's so hard, that you get these ideas, but then you're trying to speak through the voices of 6 different people and trying to understand each of these people and make something out of that. It's very hard. And then the pitch was actually harder. I don't know about harder, at least it was shorter. But still, to come up with that. Now we've gone through like 8 drafts of the pitch, and we finally got a written draft that Hafed approved of. And he came to the office. He said, "Okay, let's hear it."
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay." I performed it.
Yeah.
Quote, "I don't like it." So I was ready to shoot him. So then it's back to, then you got to go through go through it line by line and fix it and fix the performance. It's the performance I didn't like.
Right.
And the performance is what we're still working on.
It's a long process. It's a long process, and I have to admit that a lot of people think that because they have a script or because they have an idea, it's all there.
Right.
No, it's not. Preparing a pitch is totally different than preparing a script, than preparing a synopsis, which is as difficult as prepare, because you have to condense everything in one page of synopsis. So preparing a synopsis is a totally different job than preparing a pitch, than preparing a script. And each of those jobs requires a different quality.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
So for a pitch, you have, first of all, to imagine that this is something you are going to tell people. They are not going to read it. You have to tell. So it has to be something that I can communicate. It has to be something that I'm going to perform. If I am going to perform it, I have to be prepared for that. That's why in the class, for instance, what we do, we take the performance of all the students and we put them on screen, on film, and we film them and we analyze them. And then we come up and everybody discusses there and say, "Oh, I didn't like this, I like that." And well, his hands were not very expressive, or his face was absolutely blank. I mean, it didn't, your film is exciting, but I didn't see anything exciting on your face, so how could it work? So it's a part of it. It's a different practice. you have to be, for pitching, you have to become a sort of salesman.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot
sales
of people,
pitch.
absolutely, salesman, TV evangelist. That's exactly the kind of thing,
Yeah, yeah.
You have to have that excitement in you, because how to get people who are in front of you, who have heard millions of pitches, who are absolutely, have become sometimes callous.
Sure.
How to excite them,
Yeah.
if you are not.
Yeah. It is an art, I think, and you're working at it, and good for you for doing it and for working with these students who are going to actually do their pitches. First weekend in June, I know people probably who will watch this show, it will already have passed the pitch weekend, actually. But if you want to, you can count on the fact that this will happen again next year. They'll bring more people in to listen to pitches. It's an annual project of the Independent Feature Project North. And if you want more information on that, you can call 338-0871. Thank you very much. Interesting stuff.
Very welcome.
Good luck to you, Kevin.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hafed. Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Phill will be back with sculptor Jane Frees-Kluth right after this.
From mine. All right, I'm gonna take a measurement.
Ticklish?
Yeah, that would probably drive me crazy. To the arms and an inch onto the legs. So.
Hannah, look up here.
She's probably
Hannah, look up here.
Well, those are a few images from a project that I find very interesting, and with me is the artist who's doing this interesting project, Jane Frees-Kluth. Thank you for being on the show.
Hi, Phill.
Nice to have you
Nice
here.
to be here.
And you are an artist. In fact, we met, I should mention. We co-juried the Stone Arch Festival of the Arts last year. So I got to know you more as a judge and a juror, but you're an artist. Tell people what your medium is. What you like to tend to make.
Well, I consider myself a figurative sculptor. I like to do public art. I do work at home also on a smaller scale. But I've got an architectural and design background, and I kind of came into public art through that pathway and got involved in figurative sculpture after that. I've been doing it for about 5 years, and my favorite thing to do is to sculpt from life, where I have a model come to my studio and I work in a plastic material like clay, and work from the figure. And I like to have about 7 to 10 hours on a figure, and now I've got a couple of public art projects under my belt that I've been working on that have incorporated
Well, that's
figurative
right.
art.
And some of our viewers might recognize up in North Minneapolis, you were the artist who was commissioned to do the Harrison Gateway.
I did the Harrison Gateway in 1994. It's on Highway 55 and Penn Avenue. There was a lot of children involved in that project, and that was a real.
And I guess
fun,
I should have
colorful
assumed that
project.
you were doing casting with actual children then, or was that a more idealized?
Yeah, we had a kind of lottery. All the kids that wanted to be involved threw their names in a hat, and we picked one girl and one boy, and they got to be the models for the project, and that's what you see at the top of the two figures.
Yeah, it's quite a nice piece. It's very energetic and uplifting. I like.
Well,
that
the
piece.
neighborhood chose it because they liked the idea of the children actually being represented, and they were also able to participate and have some of their artwork shown on the piece.
And that was through the Minneapolis Arts Commission Gateway Project or program.
That was the third gateway project to be built. I believe there's been about 5 done now. And yep, that was one of the it was experimental. They'd just been starting the gateway project.
So kind of a pioneer there on your part.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was a pioneering effort, definitely.
Well, now you're involved with another piece of public art, which I find very intriguing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this Human Arch project you're working on?
Yes, this next one I'm working on is called the Human Arch Bridge. That's what the sculpture is called. And the sculpture is, it's a life-size figurative piece of an 8-year-old girl doing a back bend. And the reason that I chose that was because I've been involved in trying to get public art installed along the riverfront down by St. Anthony, Maine. There's a beautiful green stretch of land there, and I thought, well, what better way to become involved than to get myself involved? So I came up with this idea, and I didn't have any, there was no commission for it, so I sought out my own funds and people to donate materials. And it's a collaborative effort between myself, the model, the neighborhood, and several subcontractors who are donating materials and time. I wanted to do something on the Stone Arch Bridge, and that's kind of where I started. And most of my work is very contextual. I consider the site and the people that are around, what they might want to see. And the bridge, you know, the arch bridge has these arches, and so
Quite
it's
a
kind of
striking feature,
subconsciously, and subconsciously I just started drawing without thinking about it, and pretty soon I had these figures doing back bends, and it just all fell into place and seemed to make sense, and I really liked the idea, so I pursued turning it into a public art project.
I've read a couple of your papers that you've done some years back, and I know that space itself and those urban spaces are very important to you. Talk about that a little bit. What is it you like to find or explore in a public space?
Well, just a little background on that. I grew up as a kid out in the woods, and so the sense of moving through space, this haptic experience of what it feels like to move through space has always been very important to me, and that's why I went into architecture and environmental design. And then so with public art, it's really the same thing because you're dealing with a space and people move through the space, and it's a lot different to move through a space when it's simply a functional space as opposed to a space where maybe dreams and memories and visions are brought in that start making people think a little more about the site or about themselves. And that's another thing figurative work does. It makes people reflect because it is a body. We all have bodies, and it's like a common denominator, and everybody can relate to it. But I do really, I'm a strong advocate of imbuing our public spaces with meaning and experience, people's experience. So this sculpture on the bridge also has an event that goes along with it called Live Arch Bridge, which happens on Saturday, June 15th at 3 p.m. on the bridge during the Stone Arch Festival. And it's really kind of a public ritual in a way. I'm inviting all the public down to participate, and we're going to take the Stone Arch Bridge, or the sculpture that I made, the Human Arch Bridge, and extend people, building them into arches from both sides of the sculpture, extending it across the bridge.
So very kinetic.
So yeah, it's a moving sculpture basically. And
well, you were nice enough to bring a clip. Why don't we take a look at you in the process? Now this is well within the process of doing this, and as we take a look, why don't you describe for our viewers what it is they're seeing here. So this is the artist, Jane Frees-Kluth, and I guess this is your model.
Yes, this is Anna. She's the model for my project, Anna Santo, and she's the 8-year-old that called me and wanted to do it. And here I'm working from life with her in my studio. This is oil clay that I'm working on, and I work with the calipers and other tools and try to transfer the planes and surfaces of her face. It's
and I assume that she was professional, because when you had those calipers on her armpits, she didn't giggle.
No, she really is a natural at this, and it's interesting because all models are very different. I don't seek out models who are models. I seek out people who inspire me, is a big part of what I like with my models. This one was a little different because what I looked for was a muscular model who could be flexible and hold a back bend. Typically when I work with models, I find people who inspire me personally, where there's something about their character that inspires me. But with this project, I knew I had to find somebody who could do a back bend, and that was the main issue.
And here you are, I think, just at the end of her work with you.
Yes, she worked about 5 sessions with me and just had a ball. She really didn't want to leave.
And it must be a real treat for her then to come down to the Stone Arch Bridge and see her image replicated there.
That's what she's most excited about. She's not shy. She wants to see herself up there, and they're going to bring all their family.
You also brought an image, I think one of your early drawings of what people might see.
Yeah, this is my initial drawing of the project, and as you can see, the sculpture is in the middle.
Yep.
And then this is representing the people that we're going to build up into arches on both sides.
So those would be the live, somewhat acrobatic folks on the sides there.
Yep, and we are going to try to get as many people and organizations from the neighborhood involved. The U of M Gopher cheerleaders are nearby. They're going to be down there with us helping to build the public into these arches. And there's also going to be music commissioned for Martha Kennedy to play music to build arches too.
No kidding. This is quite the complex.
It is
I don't think people, I certainly didn't realize that, I mean, this isn't just somebody going into her studio and chipping away at something and then taking over and putting it there. I mean, this is hours and hours of work, and you had a lot of relationships with quarry people and all this too?
Yeah, I went through a real long process. Every public art project is like, I think 3 months is pretty much minimum on any project, and I can see how some projects last, 5, 6 years to get a big, $1 million public art project done. This is all being done for free, basically, by these subcontractors, as I said, and it's real wonderful for them to be involved also. It's kind of a collaboration where they can push their material and their knowledge and see what it can do by applying it to something that they would never do normally, because they're making concrete block buildings.
Right, gives them a time to run a little bit more creatively.
Yeah, and then it also gives me an opportunity to work with these technicians and learn the fine points of concrete casting, which there's, it's an incredible process. It really is. This is, by the way, this table here is...
Don't tell me you know what this is.
I don't know what it's made of, but it looks just like the concrete that I'm casting.
Oh, is that
it's
right?
the same color and
well, maybe we'll send this
texture.
with you and you can make something out of it, and we'll have
I
it
can
here in the
just build it in.
That's right. It'll be on the bridge. That's good. We've just got a moment or two left. Let's run those dates by again for the Stone Arch Festival of the Arts. They are going to be...
The Stone Arch Festival of the Arts is June 15th and 16th, and that's when my sculpture, Human Arch Bridge, will be installed on the bridge. And then after that, we're going to be installing the sculpture someplace along the riverfront or in the neighborhood, possibly in front of Marcy Open School. We're going to be trying to get a bunch of those kids
keep it in
involved.
Minneapolis somewhere.
Yeah, and it's important that it is down by the river to me. If I can find other places too, that's fine. But it's really about the river and about the bridge. And so
then your celebration, your
there.
specific sort of dedication is at what you say, 3 o'clock on that
3
Saturday?
o'clock on Saturday, June 15th.
That's great.
Yep, and we're looking for as many people to come down and participate.
Well, I'm planning on being there. One last
Good.
quick question. Any other major projects in the works in the back of your mind that you're looking forward to?
Yes, I do actually. I originally wanted to try to get a riverfront project going on a larger scale, which would be and have incorporated into it old bits of architecture from Minneapolis area. There's a lot of that around.
And that would bring together your architectural background with your art, public art.
Right, yep.
Interesting.
And I'm a gymnast, so this piece here kind of brings together gymnastics and,
Totally
and
links it.
architecture and rituals, which I feel I lack in my life in a certain way, so it's
good
like all
for
these
you.
things coming together.
Jane, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Phil.
Nice to learn more about your project.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, before Janet comes back to wrap up the show, we thought we'd bring you a short preview of the upcoming Herman Iron Pour. That's out in Herman, Minnesota. Next month, John Poole, who's involved with that, will be with us. So stay tuned, and Janet will join me in just a moment.
There's only been artists coming together, making their own molds, and melting the iron, and pouring it themselves to make sculpture for 30, 35 years. To give people this experience, to allow them to participate and see this kind of three-ring circus kind of event, that's what makes it all worthwhile. After and during the pour, the community was just thrilled. I mean, even that day of the pour, people kept on coming up to me and other artists that were coming up there. Is it going to happen next year? And so the community was just overwhelmed. They were just so happy to have that event happen. It gave them some exposure.
Well, another nice show, Janet.
It was, indeed. Good guests.
Well, and that pitching conference from Hollywood, that's very interesting to me.
And it's a really good thing for the community to have people who are writing here to have opportunity to pitch to people who make decisions about that stuff. It's a
What
good
an
deal.
inspiring young man that McKeever fellow is.
I admire him.
Yeah,
That takes a
that's
lot of
very
guts
good.
to do it just right here for me, much less, you know.
Exactly. And I
So-
didn't realize that had been going on for 7 years. Quite a history there.
Good thing.
Yeah. Well, now, upcoming in the merry month of June, a couple other things I just thought I'd mention here at the end of the show. There are going to be a couple of public art installations in addition to Jane Frees-Kluth's piece down at the Stone Arch Bridge here in the riverfront. Down in the Lyndale neighborhood, artist has put up a mural on an old NSP substation. Steve Lick is the artist. And I guess he always thought that this old substation looked a little bit like an aquarium. So if you go down to about 33rd and Garfield South, you'll be able to see some fish installed with the help of neighborhood kids, by the way,
Oh.
up on this old substation.
Well,
so
that
that's
sounds
kind
kinda
of
fun.
June
Yeah.
8th kickoff for that. And the same day, the Camden Gateway is going to be dedicated up in far north Minneapolis.
My neighborhood.
That's right.
Yep.
So another nice Minneapolis Arts Commission gateway, I think, is being installed.
And of course, it's Juneteenth. It's the month
Yeah.
of that big celebration. There's going to be a lot of good stuff for filmmakers. And the most exciting thing is that Gordon Parks is going to be in town. He's going to be do several appearances. Gordon Parks was the director of...
Shaft.
You got it.
That's right, Shaft. So if you missed Shaft, you can catch him.
That's right.
Or if you saw Shaft, you can catch
Yeah,
him.
he's going to talk about it. He's going to introduce the film.
Oh, that's really good.
So-
So Juneteenth, a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, good.
Okay. And then next month on Artifacts, we're going to be talking with John Poole about the Herman Iron Pour. That's the iron pour they do out in Herman, Minnesota. And very interesting thing. And you just saw a little clip about that too. So John Poole will be here and other guests.
And of course, if you have any questions, be sure to call the Artifacts hotline, 673-2234.
That's right. And do stay tuned. We'll have our events calendar up. And until next time, I'm Phill Lindsay.
I'm Janet Zahn. Thanks for watching.